Well, the old saying used to be better living through chemistry because of all the things that we did and built and plastics and all of that stuff that came from our chemical labs. But it turns out that might not necessarily be the case. And we've known for a long time that there are things in these chemically created products that are harmful to us and the world around us. And that's why I have asked Erica Schrader with Toxic Free Future to join us. Erica, thank you. I appreciate that. And I want to start, I want to have you just take us back, just briefly, sort of give us a look back at when we first started to realize there was a problem with these chemicals surrounding us and what they were finding and where they were showing up.
So the study that we did has to do with certain flame retardants and that are used in electronics and have also been used in furniture and other places. And, the first time that we actually realized that that this kind of flame retardant could cause a problem was actually back in the 70s, when they actually were misused in that case. They contaminated animal feed and they started showing up in women's breast milk in Michigan.
Yikes, that's frightening because if it's showing up in women's breast milk, that means it's getting passed along to the babies as well, which is bad news because, as we know, they are developing, and anything that interferes with that can be a problem. Now, as I understand it, and Erica, please correct me if I'm wrong, because certainly you're the expert here, but as we saw that these things, and I think you mentioned a couple of the uses, excuse me, like the plastics we were using to like build the frames of a television set and that sort of thing. And they were meant to be flame retardant so that they would not contribute to house fires. But as we started to realize that there were harmful products in these, we tried to move away from it and to chemicals that were considered safer. But as I understand it, those are not necessarily that much safer. Am I right?
Right. So in our study, we looked for flame retardants that have actually been banned and phased out, and are in this country at least, no longer used in our furniture and our televisions. But we also looked for their replacements. So we wanted to know, like, when we banned those chemicals, did we actually make a positive difference? But unfortunately, when the first set of chemicals were banned, they just banned those specific compounds and didn't look at the larger class. And the industry, instead of making sure what they were using was safe, they turned to other chemicals in the same class. So now we're seeing that these other brominated flame retardants are also building up in women's breast milk and can also pose some of the same health concerns.
Well, let's talk about those because there's a reason you're honed in on breast milk. I mean, it seems like kind of an obvious question, but why are these particular chemicals a problem in breast milk? What problems are they causing for the babies?
So the chemicals that we found, that are, the newer compounds that we're seeing for the first time in US breast milk are known to impact thyroid hormone. And when babies are developing, the levels of thyroid hormone are so important for brain development. And so we're really concerned that because they're getting these toxic chemicals, that they're being exposed to these toxic chemicals during development in the womb, that's actually impacting their brains.
So you had mentioned too that when the chemicals were banned, they only banned specific types. These are also in the same class. Was there even any effort to improve upon the safety of these new chemicals at all, or was it just, well, we can't use these, so we're just going to use these?
Well, we don't even know what chemicals are in the products that we're using because they're not labeled and there's no disclosure. So when the first set of chemicals are called PBDEs were banned, we didn't really know what the industry was going to turn to. We kind of thought that they might start using something really similar. And so one of the things that we did in 2017, we did our first set of testing and then followed it up a couple years later with more testing. We looked at these casings of TVs because we wanted to know, once these PBDEs were banned, what would they have turned to? And unfortunately, what we learned was that, the vast majority of the cases, they had chosen very similar compounds. So other brominated flame retardants. There were a couple TV companies that had done better and chosen something that was believed to be safer. But most companies had really just gone with the easiest solution and chosen something that was in the same harmful class.
Well, now I have to ask, and I don't know if I'm going too deep into the weeds here, but those few companies that went with products they felt might be safer, were those actually safer?
So yes, there has been one of the problems we have besides, not even knowing what chemicals are being used is a lot of these chemicals aren't assessed for safety before they're used. So, but there have been some safety assessments of this other type of flame retardant called phosphates and found that they are indeed safer. So, in a lot of places, flame retardants have been used in places where they're not even needed. And furniture is the best example of that. For many years, we had lots of flame retardants in our furniture. It turned out there was no fire safety benefit of that. We were just being exposed for no reason. When you're talking about electronics, we do have a heat source there, and they do need to find some way to make sure that that doesn't create a fire hazard. They can do that with alternate materials, and they can do it with safer chemicals.
So there are alternatives out there that could be used that would do the job that aren't necessarily putting all of these other harmful chemicals into the air, into the water, into the soil, and eventually into our systems.
That's exactly right. There are companies that are doing the right thing. We just need policies, from our government that that address the whole class of these harmful flame retardants. So the larger class of concern is called organohalogen. And Washington State actually issued a rule the very beginning of June that will ban that whole class in enclosures for all indoor electric and electronic products. So Washington State is ahead. New York has a similar, less broad, but a similar law. So we have a couple of states that have taken action, but we need national action to make sure that these harmful chemicals aren't used. And we need companies. We're asking Best Buy, as such an important retailer of electronics, to go ahead and make a policy that anything sold in their stores will not contain these harmful flame retardants.
See, and I hadn't even thought of that. I mean, we often think about, like you said, state legislatures or Congress setting these policies, but a major retailer like Best Buy or Amazon or Target or Walmart, they could all do the same thing, couldn't they? They could step up and say, well, if you want to sell your products, through our venues, right? I mean, they would have to, play ball.
Yeah, and these companies all have chemicals policies. They just don't go that far. And Best Buy, in fact, they did establish a policy that their own brand, so that the TVs that they make, which is a really small percentage of what they actually sell, but their policy is that they'll only use safer flame retardants in the ones that actually have the Best Buy brand. So they've, in fact, proven that it can be done.
I would say even if it is a small percentage, just proving that it's possible is a good step, don't you think?
Oh, it's a huge step that Best Buy has shown that this can be done. There's also, certifying agencies that maintain lists of safer flame retardants and companies that use those. So, that's another proof that this can be done. There's really no reason we should continue using flame retardants that can build up in our breast milk and harm our babies.
Now, I know you were focused on breast milk, and it's okay if you can't answer this, but I mean, have you just sort of tangentially come across these chemicals showing up in other places? I mean, the one thing, we think about around here in the Northwest is, the Puget Sound orcas and the stuff that builds up in their bodies and stays there. I mean, but the same could be true for, beavers over at the nearest river or, whatever creatures we're looking at. I mean, are we seeing these chemicals? These are chemicals that are just everywhere, aren't they? Basically, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, it turns out, and we've done our own research on this, that when we use these flame retardants in, indoors, in our homes, in our schools, in our workplaces, they actually make their way into the outdoor environment. And so we see them in our surface water, in our in sediment, and we end up seeing them in the animals. And in Washington, the Northwest, we've seen that this is a major threat for the survival of salmon and therefore for the survival of our orcas.
And that's, like I say, that's the one we all look at because they're so incredible, and they draw such emotion out of us that tends to be a focus. But they're also like a guide. They're also like a compass for us, in what we're doing. Now, we often will hear the term forever chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this newer class that they replaced the older class with, would we still consider those forever chemicals since they're basically the same family and basically just as harmful?
So the term forever chemicals is really used to refer to what are called the PFAS, which have a really long chemical name, and it's hard to communicate. So that's why we call those forever chemicals. And those are fluorinated compounds. So they're organic chemicals, but they have a fluorine on them. And those are used as have been used as stain protectors in firefighting foam, and have a lot of different uses. So that's different. In this case, what we looked at were brominated chemicals. So, kind of in the larger chemical class, they're together, but it's a little bit different. We did publish a study 2 years ago on the presence of the forever chemicals in breast milk. So we also found PFAS in 100% of the samples that we tested of breast milk.
I shouldn't be shocked by that because, I mean, we know that stuff is everywhere. So then the way I probably should ask the question, and I will admit more intelligently this time around, is with these brominated chemicals. I mean, they're not forever chemicals, but I would assume, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that they do last a while before they break down or reach a point where they are no longer harmful.
That's correct. So the brominated flame retardants, they're known for being persistent. So they last a long time in our indoor environment and our outdoor environment, and they build up in our bodies. And they're also built up in fat. So they're called lipophilic chemicals. And that's why we specifically look for them in breast milk, because of course, breast milk is rich in fats. And so when we have a chemical that is attracted to fat, that's a place where it's going to build up. And then of course, it's important to know what's in breast milk because that's what babies are drinking.
So if this is a concern, are we to a point where we're telling mothers, as much as there are benefits to breastfeeding, maybe formula is a better way to go?
No, we absolutely continue to recommend, we're not medical doctors, but we always share the information that there are so many benefits to breast milk, both for the child in terms of preventing infections, as well as for the mother's health and for the bond that's created between the mom and the baby. So, we continue to, emphasize that breast milk has incredible benefits and moms should breastfeed as much as possible. But to make that possible, we really need to make sure it's safe. And again, there's no reason we should be using these harmful chemicals that build up in breast milk when there are safer ways to meet our needs.
But bottom line, just to sort of bring the conversation full circle here, until we make those changes, until the companies and legislatures make new policies, we're just going to have to live with the results of having them. Am I right?
What the hopeful thing that we saw in this study was that the harmful persistent chemicals that have been banned are on the decline in North America. And we saw a really significant change from the last time they were, significant decline of 70% from the last time they were measured here in the Northwest. So we know that when we take action, we make breast milk safer for moms and babies. And, it's unfortunate and disturbing that we continue to have these toxic chemicals in breast milk. But what we really need to do is change policies so that breast milk becomes safer.
All right, Erica, while I have you, is there anything that I missed?
I think you covered it.
Wonderful. Well, Erica Schrader with Toxic Free Future, certainly appreciate the insight. For those like even when I first read about your latest study, it was a real eye opener because even though it's something that I think about, like I had mentioned to you in the water and in the air and in the things around us, the fact that these chemicals are still being used and getting as deep into our systems as a mother's breast milk is it is still shocking. So definitely appreciate you taking some time to chat with us about it.
Well, very happy to do it. Thank you so much for inviting me.